Hello and welcome. This is the Focus Masterclass podcast, where we speak to some of the great minds in visual effects to dive deep into every part of the industry, from production, the creative process, business, and technology. In this edition, we're back for part 2 of our masterclass with MPC VFX supervisor Erik Nash. This time he takes questions and discusses the challenges of building environments and the elements that make them come alive. Please enjoy this second part of Erik Nash's masterclass. What are the typical challenges or roadblocks you face when creating environment VFX that looks very real, particularly when you shoot in a studio?
Well, as I referred to, lighting is the toughest thing. Daylight, whether it's hard sunlight or open sky, is the scale of it outdoors is so big, and whenever you're on a soundstage, even a big soundstage, it's really tough to replicate. And traditionally, the cinematographer takes his best crack at it without sort of a lot of thought giving to, well, what is the sky in this ultimately going to be? And it often falls to us in visual effects once it's been shot and turned over to go, okay, well, here's how it was lit. Now, how do we shoehorn a background and a lighting condition in and around the way this usually fairly contained set was shot, which is the reason I wanted to take a different approach this time around and both have a lot of choices available to us, but also get the director and the cinematographer to commit up front to a condition and have an image, in this case, one of these high dynamic range sky domes that we all point to and agree upon. This is the sky that is lighting this scene. And then with the little bit of technology that we developed with the help of some people at Technicolor, we were able to basically do this image-based lighting. And it had two advantages. One, we knew going in what the background was going to be, or what the deep background if you saw the sky, but we also knew how to light the CG environment around it because we had committed to this sky dome image. And it really worked out exactly as well as I had hoped. And in talking to some of my colleagues at MPC, there's a lot of interest in this system and using it on other projects going forward.
Would you say that lighting would be the key element that really
Absolutely.
Brings an environment to life?
Yep.
Yeah.
And the other thing I would say is, especially in a naturalistic environment like this, rather than modeling things from the ground up, having stuff built from photography, which is why we sent our photogrammetry team up to the Yukon, on 2 different occasions, so that everything was built from photographic reference, or in a lot of cases, modeled from photography. And we had all those great photo textures so that we weren't creating shaders or, modeling from scratch.
I remember that was also one of the big things for The Lion King as well. When I was discussing this with another supervisor, I think, on The Lion King, like how the lighting was the key thing, and how it lit like certain parts of the whole savannah. So I feel like this would be, I feel like that was also interesting that you guys, like the team, went to the actual locations like twice, one in the winter and then one in the summer. Is that right? Or spring? Or
No, it was Middle of
Summer.
summer and middle of winter. The tricky
Yeah,
part
because
about the winter up there is the days are so short.
yes, exactly.
Sun comes up late and goes down early, so not a whole lot of working hours in the day in the middle of the winter.
I wanted to pick apart a little bit or kind of dig a little bit deeper about like the set. How much of the
Hmm.
environment do you want to simulate on set practically? Or like do you simulate as much as you can and then add in the other details you cannot later on? Or how does that work?
Well, what we did for all of the sets we built up at our ranch, the parts that we built, the way it was designed was we designed a bigger set than was going to be built, and then myself, in conjunction with the production designer, looking at the budget and how big an area we had at the ranch to build the set, we would decide where the practical build would stop and where the CG extension took over. And within the footprint of what we were going to build, it was built and completely finished. A lot of times, like if you're doing a downtown street, you'll only build the first floor, and then everything above that would be extension. We would build the whole building. I mean, they weren't tall buildings, but a lot of them had second stories, but they were built all the way up to the second story, including the roofs. The back sides of the buildings weren't finished because we never went back there and shot. That's not true. There was one instance where we were on the back side of a building, but we knew that going in, so that was finished. But in general, what was going to be built was built and finished in its entirety, and then there was a clean dividing line where that practical set stopped, and then everything beyond it would be a digital set extension. The art department was instrumental in giving us guidance and designs and reference materials for what the rest of that build looked like. But it was those parts of the, say, Dawson City, down the street, that was all created by the MPC asset teams based on this art department material that they turned over.
And how much influence do you have on like set building? Where so you kind of mentioned already that you sort of optimized it for the VFX.
Yeah, it was. There's always a lot of back and forth. The production designers working within a fixed budget in terms of what they can afford to build, and they want to make what they build as good as it can possibly be. So in that regard, they want to build less so that they can put as much love and care into what they do build. On the other hand, we want them to build as much as they can afford to minimize how much set extension. I mean, we know we're going to have to do the set extensions, but we want to get at least some of the photography, some of the tighter coverage within that set to be fully contained in the set. So there's a lot of back and forth. Budget plays a huge role in what ultimately winds up being built and what winds up being done digitally. And it varies from set to set. So it's sort of a very organic process with a lot of give and take. And then there are late changes and, there visual effects portion of it. We have the luxury of all of post production. We don't have the same sort of drop dead hard and fast deadline by which point the set has to be done that the practical build is. So we have the luxury of being able to have things evolve and change as we go.
What was well, this is my last question before we go
Okay.
to the social media questions.
Okay.
What was the most challenging shot or sequence from all of this that you had to do?
Oh, probably the avalanche sequence, because it's Buck leading the team, pulling the sled down a frozen river in broad daylight, when an avalanche occurs that threatens them, and the sequence segues into Buck figuring out a way to save themselves by taking them into an ice cave that is shielded from the avalanche. So we had so the only thing that was photographed was the two actors, Omar Sy and Karaji, on the sled and the sled. That was the only thing in the entire sequence that was actually shot with a motion picture camera. The entire frozen river, mountain, valley environment was 100% digital. Obviously, the avalanche was a huge visual effects undertaking. And then when they went into the ice cave, that environment was all digital. And the lighting, again, back to the lighting once we were in the cave where the daylight is pouring through this frozen waterfall, that's very striated. So we had to have a traveling light effect, which we did with an LED wall, giving this sort of flashing light on the actors and the sled as they raced down the length of this ice cave. It's really, I think, terrific sequence. It really turned out well, but definitely in the running for one of the most complicated ones in the movie in terms of visual effects. And 9 CG dogs thrown in for good measure.
For sure. Right. So for everyone, for the benefit of everybody else listening, we put out a question, a call for questions on social media, and we got a couple for you, Eric. So the first one is, how did you sell to the client that work done in CG would be cheaper than doing it practical on location?
Well, the short answer is we didn't. We didn't sell it. We didn't have to. It was determined ahead of time, above our pay grade, that was the way it was going to be done. None of the powers that be wanted to do this, shoot this movie in the Yukon. Just the dealing with weather and the logistics of shooting in that sort of rugged wilderness were not anything anybody wanted to do. And, rightfully, as I sort of led off with, the fact that it was going to be a huge visual effects show because of the dogs. Once a shot is by definition a visual effects shot, the added expense of doing environment work in addition to the CG dog work is an incremental uptick in expense rather than a shot that otherwise would have been a practical shot. We knew that there weren't going to be a whole lot of shots in the movie that didn't involve CG, so why not make it a much more practical production by not going to the Yukon and working in the comfortable confines of the Hollywood zone.
That's actually a very interesting point. So I suppose then that, if just to jump off of this question as well, I suppose then that it would also be more difficult to shoot like a CG dog or something in the Yukon, or like in any kind of hostile, well, not necessarily hostile, but like kind of, that kind
Yeah,
of environment.
it makes everything harder.
Yeah.
And you're traveling the entire crew. You're putting the entire crew up in hotels and per diem, and weather is a huge issue. in areas like that where you could get rained out for days on end.
And
Not a
lighting.
prop. And lighting, yeah. And again, when you get into the winter part of the story, very short days. More than half of the exteriors of the movie take place in the winter, yet we shot in the summer. When we had long hours of sunlight here in the lower latitudes. So given the nature of the project, it really made sense on a whole bunch of levels to do it this way. So the short answer is we didn't have to convince anybody that this was the way to do it. Everybody saw that this was the way to do it.
Yeah. Final question from social media as well. A little bit left field, but I suppose I'm curious as well, like what you think about this. What is the easiest animal to animate?
Well, that's an easy one. In the context of Call of the Wild, which had a lot of dogs and a bear and caribou and a lot of four-legged mammals, but by far the easiest of the animals we did on Call of the Wild was the birds. Partly because birds in flight. It's very much a cyclical animation. I mean, it's basically just flapping wings, and the fact that they're seen from a distance in flocks, usually, it makes it so it's almost a procedural task as opposed to anything that takes a lot of care and nuance. Not that it's easy, but compared to a dog with facial expression and fur dynamics, the birds were quite a bit easier.
All right. Thank you so much, Erik, for your time and for doing that really insightful masterclass.
It's been my pleasure.
And good luck with your future projects as well.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
If you enjoyed this masterclass podcast, please sign up to our newsletter at thefocus.com/subscribe to keep up with future podcasts, as well as get the latest visual effects content, tailored job alerts, and virtual learning materials straight to your inbox. You can also subscribe, follow, or like us on our social media channels at The Focus Careers. We'll share the links to those channels in the description. We'll speak again next time.